Hi everyone, we're going to talk about introductory paragraphs today, and this is mostly for my ESL, academic ESL students, but if anyone else benefits from it, that's fine with me. Okay. We're in our gap between semesters right now, that's why my shirt is covered with dog hair and I haven't shaved in a couple days, but bear with me. So we're going to talk about writing introductory paragraphs or academic essays, specifically three important parts of them: the hook, the background, and the thesis, in that order. So, first, the hook. My rule for the hook is to make it interesting. May always make it interesting. That's what a hook is for. Hook means like you're fishing. You're trying to catch someone. You're trying to catch the reader. So make it interesting above all. It doesn't necessarily have to be on topic for your essay, although you do have to get back onto your topic from there. It can be a question, and your teachers might not want questions in the body of the essay, but they'll definitely tolerate them in a hook as long as it's interesting. And it can be a quote. It doesn't have to be a quote from one of the books that you're using, in the main body of your essay. But in any case, don't forget to cite. You have to put the parentheses with the author's name and all that stuff. Okay. So I have a picture of a casino, or really the sign outside of a casino here. I like to compare a hook to the sign outside of a casino because a casino's purpose is very different from the purpose of the sign. The casino is trying to take your money a little bit at a time, and while you're there, you'll also probably lose your hearing and damage your lungs. But the sign doesn't tell you any of that, right? It would be a terrible sign if it did. So it's intentionally trying to get your attention, and even in a misleading way, right? So this looks like it's something for kids or something very playful and sweet with lots of, I don't know, happy music and maybe some balloon animals. But it's not, right? You sit in front of a machine very slowly losing money, a quarter or a dollar at a time. So the sign, like a hook, has to be interesting, and it doesn't have to tell you necessarily what's in the essay, right? That's not what the sign is for. That's not what a hook is for, okay? So above all, make your hook interesting. It doesn't have to be informative, but it has to be interesting, okay? So I'm going to give you some examples, starting with the hook, but let's pretend we're writing an essay where this is the prompt and we're using this book. Okay, so the prompt is: in an academic essay, compare and contrast the applications of the principles in Becoming a Learner by two fictional characters. Don't worry if you haven't read this book. I read it a long time ago and I forgot what it's about too. But my point is, I'm going to write my background assuming that I have to tell the reader what this book is, right? And then it says two fictional characters, so I'm probably going to have to introduce a work of fiction too. By the way, if you're in academic writing, this kind of book that you use to analyze another book is called your analytic lens. Um, I don't know, if you're in first year college writing, you probably are using some book like this, or like Grit or Power of Habit or something like that. So keep in mind, if your thesis has to be about this book, you're going to have to tell the reader about it too. So here's some bad examples of a hook for a thesis for a prompt the prompt that we just talked about. Okay, so the hook is right up at the top. Many people have problems in school. And then there's some background, and then there's a thesis. Harry and Hermione differ in the traditionality of their approach to academics, displaying separate principles and becoming a learner. Well, so my thesis answers the question, so that's good. The problem is my hook's not very interesting. Many people have problems in school. It's not shocking. It's not exciting. Um, it's not really attention gating. It's true, but nobody will be surprised to hear that it's true, right? So here's another example. This one's also not very good. Yeah, Hermione has a conventional view of learning. So think of how boring this would be if you didn't know who Hermione was. You're like, who is that and why do I care? There are two problems. One, or maybe three problems. One, it's not interesting. Two, the reader doesn't know who these people are yet, or what you're talking about yet, right? And three, this is really support. It's not a hook. Support should probably go in one of the body paragraphs. This looks like it supports my thesis, so it seems like it's on topic, but the hook is not a sentence of support, right? It's just to get the reader's attention. So here's a question: do you like learning? like the first one, it's just not very interesting. It is a question, but I think no one will be. If someone tried to start a conversation with you with this question, how interested would you be to continue that conversation? I think I would be at maybe a 3. Okay, so not very interesting. Although a question is okay, right? So here's a better example. I got my first lesson in botany, the study of plants, right, in the emergency room. So that's not really on topic for my essay, but it's definitely interesting. I definitely want to know what happened to this person. Did they eat some kind of poisonous mushroom? And then, mushrooms are not botany, are they? And then they went to the hospital. I want to know what happened next, right? It got my attention, and that's what a hook should do. Here's another one. To the well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure. It's an interesting quote, and that's from, I think, the first Harry Potter book. And that sort of leaves me away to get back onto my topic from the hook, which is important. This is not exactly on topic, but that's okay. It just has to be interesting. And this is interesting. I want to know what this person is talking about. Who said this in the book? And why did they think death? Why were they so positive about death? Right? So again, quotes are okay. I still have to cite it, right? Okay. So here's another one. This is the question. How much can a student pick up just from classes? So that's a more interesting question than the other one, the do you like learning question. I actually have to think of an answer for this. And maybe, this writer is going to answer the question, or maybe they're just leading that, trying to get my attention as they lead into the background information. If it's that, that's okay too. All I care about is that I'm interested, right? And that means it's a good hook. Okay. So on to the next 2 sections. The hook is generally the first sentence in the whole essay, right? The first sentence in the first paragraph. Then there's some background, and there could be a lot or there could be a little. And then there's the thesis. The thesis is usually the last sentence. Ask your teacher if the teacher's okay with more than 1 sentence, or 2 paragraphs of introduction or something like that. I have a rule of thumb for the background. Rule of thumb means like a general rule that you can use all the time. My rule of thumb for background is give the reader enough information to understand the thesis. That means you're not supporting the thesis yet. You're not proving that it's true, because that's what the body paragraphs are for. But you're giving them enough so that they will at least know what the words are. They'll know what the book is that you're talking about. If you mention characters, they'll know who they are. So that they don't look at the thesis and not even still understand what your topic is, what your argument is. Okay. So for the thesis itself, and this is very important, you want to answer the question in the prompt. Your answer should be the main point in your essay. And this is very important. A lot of students start off going the wrong direction, not answering the prompt, and they end up writing 3 to 5 pages that still don't answer the prompt, and they don't get a good grade. They might get credit for like the structure or something like that, but not for the content of their essay. And it's because they didn't do the very basic part of giving the teacher the answer to the question that the teacher asked. Also, don't announce that you'll answer it later. It's very annoying, as I'll show you in some examples. So the answering the prompt part, I often tell my students, is like filling an order at a restaurant if you're a waiter or a cook. And say you have a customer, the teacher, who asks for a pizza, and you give them a birthday cake. It doesn't matter how much time you spent making the birthday cake or how good the birthday cake is. If it's not a pizza, you're not going to get a good grade as a waiter or a chef, okay? So keep that in mind. Answering the thesis is probably the most important thing you can do in the essay. Sorry, answering the prompt. Okay, so as for the second thing, don't announce your thesis. So it can be very annoying when you ask a question and the answer is something like, I will tell you my answer. Okay, I just want to know the answer. I don't want to know that you'll tell me the answer later. Okay, so imagine you're taking a math test and you have a question that looks like this and the answer looks like this. Just tell me, just give me the answer. It sounds like you're stalling for time or something, like a certain well-known public figure right now who doesn't want to give a straightforward answer, right? So don't do this. You wouldn't do it in a math question. Don't do it in your essay either. It's in the thesis where you're supposed to answer the question. Same thing if you have like a biology test and you answer your question like this, you're not going to get points. Give me the 3 causes of speciation. Don't tell me that you will give me them later. Okay, so don't announce that you have an answer. Just give your answer in the thesis. Okay. So as for the relationship of background to thesis, imagine we use the thesis that I had in the example paragraph before. Harry and Hermione differ in the traditionality of their approach to academics, displaying separate principles and becoming a learner. So imagine you hadn't read Becoming a Learner, and you're always supposed to imagine that someone who does not know your book is reading your essay. Imagine a smart college student who's not in your class, right, is reading your essay. And here you might need a little imagination. Imagine someone who hasn't read Harry Potter or hasn't seen any of the movies. They don't know who Harry and Hermione are. What does this thesis look like to someone who doesn't know those books or movies and doesn't know Becoming a Learner? I mean, it might as well be half redacted, right? Blank and blank, somebody and somebody differ in the traditionality of their approach to academics. If you don't know specifically what the topic of the essay is, approach to academics is a little bit broad sounding. Displaying separate principles, what are the principles in Becoming a Learner? And again, if the reader hasn't read that book, then this will be very confusing to them, right? So part of our job in the background is to give them enough so that they will understand this even if they haven't read the book. Okay, so here's a bad example. I kept my hook from before. The hook is okay, but the background and thesis are not. So hook, how much can a student pick up just from classes? And background, Harry Potter and Hermione Granger take different strategies to learn. Who are they? I don't know. Harry learns the most outside of class and Hermione learns the most inside of class. Okay, so I guess they're students, but where? Are they college students? I don't know. These match strategies from Becoming a Learner by Matthew L. Sanders. Okay, so Matthew L. Sanders is writing about learning strategies, I guess. In the following essay, I will explore this idea. So obviously the thesis is one of those announcing theses. It's not answering the question. And then everything else in the background is not explaining who these people are or what the contents of this book are. It's sort of assuming that the reader already knows them, and it's putting down arguments like it's a body paragraph, right? So this paragraph will be really confusing if the reader doesn't know who Harry or Hermione or this book, Becoming a Learner, know what those are, right? So it's not really functioning as background, and maybe it's good in this case that the thesis doesn't use any of those words, although, it's not a good thesis. So here's a better example. So I'm not going to read all this, but I'll let you read it. I'm just going to point out, if you don't know who Harry and Hermione are, you know now that they're characters in a book or a series of books. You know what the title of that series of books is, and you know who wrote it. You know it's fiction because the next sentence under the introduction of Harry and Hermione says it's fiction. And there's a nice segue between the two books. There's a nice transition, right? We have the introduction of the two characters, and we have the introduction of the analytic lens. Matthew L. Sanders, a professor of communication. Okay. So, and we know a little bit about the contents of the book. This background could give a little bit more about the contents of Becoming a Learner. We don't know really what the book's about, but we can guess because he's a professor of communication that it's about communication. And then the thesis is good. And when we read the thesis and we see the words Harry, Hermione, we see these two names, we know who they are. We see principles in Becoming a Learner. Actually, so this background was not entirely successful because we still don't know what principles they're talking about. But we do know that Becoming a Learner is a book by a professor of communication. So this is better. It's not perfect. To be honest, I ran out of space. But it's much better, right? Much better. The thesis answers the question. The background gives enough information to understand the thesis, aside from the principles. The hook is interesting, right? So this is a much more successful example of an introductory paragraph. So to recap the main points, make the hook interesting. Make the background enough to understand the thesis. If you're using 3 books in your thesis, tell the reader what all 3 books are. Tell them the main points of all 3 books, or at least the main points that you need to understand the thesis. Okay? And thesis, answer the question in the prompt. Don't answer a different question. Don't tell them that you will answer it later. Just answer the question in the prompt. Okay. I hope this has been helpful.